I think the first thing we should probably do is let everybody know what you have done in the past to be sufficiently reprehensible to be a worthwhile guest on this particular podcast. Graham, why don't you let everybody know, well, yeah, the nature of your sins and crimes, yeah.
Well, I was, for most of my adult life, I was a sitcom writer, comedy writer, and quite a successful one. Got a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Comedy Awards, standing ovation. I think I've won about 5 BAFTAs personally, 1 Emmy. Done about 5 sitcoms, 3 of which are kind of near household names.
What were they?
Father Ted was the main one. Father Ted actually was so influential that they say it had a little bit to do with the Irish Church releasing its hold in the 90s on Ireland, just because we weren't as very satirical, we were very silly, we were always a surreal and silly show, and so that had more effect. Something I am in 2 minds about now, and actually kind of just helped limit the church's influence to some extent by simply throwing a banana peel in their way, So everything was going great. I was asked to write an accompanying play for a Peter Schaefer farce, which I love, called Black Comedy, which has got the most extraordinary premise. And that was the first thing, I think. Oh, and I was supposed to go and teach comedy in Australia. That was the first.
They need that. They need somebody to teach that.
That was the first thing that went. They said they couldn't. I heard something I heard over and over again, that it was security problems. They couldn't afford the security. You'd hear that a lot. Then the
security for you or for the people that you were going to offend?
Well, that's the thing. That was the first time I said, "Can I speak to my accusers? Can I see if I can?" I know, yeah. I was very in the early.
How old-fashioned can you get?
Well, this was the very earliest days when I still felt that there were people of good faith within things like gender ideology, and if you just explained certain things, they would, like, for instance, one of the things that I started talking about, because I was paying attention to women who were being bullied offline, who were called TERFs, and I was trying to figure all this out, but I saw that women were getting death threats and rape threats for even discussing it. And one of the earliest things I saw was actually a Canadian story, that the Vancouver Rape Relief had a dead rat nailed to their door because they wouldn't accept men in their sessions, or their or whatever they're called.
Was that before or after the government cut off their funding for refusing to accept men?
I think it was after, and I helped raise money for them, and I just thought, as soon as some people saw it, they would go, "What? A rat nailed to the door of a rape crisis center?
A dead rat, to be fair.
A dead rat. What can we do to help?" And there was none of that. No one stood up for me. I just started the kind of propaganda piece paper, Pink News, has now published over 75 stories about me. They famously did 42 stories on J.K. Rowling in a single week. So 6 stories a day for 7 days.
The world's most famous TERF?
Yeah, absolutely.
Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, right?
Yeah.
That's the acronym of the day.
Yeah, and as far as I could make out, it did not seem exclusionary. The feminism these women were practicing was basic feminism that I've.
You mean the kind that believes that women exist?
That women exist.
Oh, yeah, that kind of feminism.
That they have value. That sex is important, and that men shouldn't be allowed in women's sports and all this type of thing. And I started saying,
especially fetishistic men, those sorts of men.
Yeah, and especially the kind of men who would want to do it.
Yeah, right. Especially those kind. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was almost instantaneous. I lost every job I got would just disappear within moments. Sometimes I'm the shortest term director on any project, I think, when I was asked to direct Steve Martin's Only Murders in the Building, and then put down the phone, and a few minutes later got an email saying actually someone else has stepped in. And I suspect that the real reason for that was that he, being excited, announced to his colleagues, "We've got Graham Linehan," and someone put up their hand and said he's a bigot. And I think that that's basically what means I can't really work in the UK at the moment. I had a musical based on Father Ted that would have made millions, and they just took it from me, refused to make it if my name is associated with it.
I've often thought that, when people are no longer, what would you say, cynical and evil enough to be greedy, we're really, really in trouble.
That's right.
Definitely.
I hate, you see, I don't want to take over, but basically maybe we should I should leave the rest about, because there's so much.
Well, I want to just get the story exactly straight so everyone knows. So, were you the most successful sitcom writer in the UK? Is that a reasonable statement, or in the top 5? Like, what do you think's fair?
I think it's, I don't know.
I'd say, definitely top 5.
Okay,
No,
okay,
it's hard
so
for me
definitely that. And okay,
there's probably not even 5 good sitcoms.
No, there probably isn't. No.
Right. The tallest midget in the world. Right. And so, okay, now, and you said you had 3 extremely famous sitcoms, one of which was Father Ted. What were the other 2?
The other was one called The IT Crowd, which was set, it was about IT, an IT department, because we wrote it in around 2005, and I noticed the internet becoming a thing. And I was always told, well, I went to an early Danny Simon course, who was one of the writers on Bilko, and a lot of things that Woody Allen worked on, Neil Simon's brother, and he said a sitcom should always be about social change. So if you see something coming around the corner, write about it. So I always had my ear
like
to
the Jeffersons or All in the Family, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of on the cutting edge of social inquiry.
Yeah.
Right, those were extremely well timed.
Yes, the one example he gave was Mary Tyler Moore.
Right, yeah, another great example. Yeah, absolutely.
Although he used the phrase "women's libbers," which was very funny. He's this old guy.
I know. It's like 90-year-old people use that phrase.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I wrote The IT Crowd. Like, we have an early parody ad for Facebook. It was so unusual to us, and I still feel that about the internet, that we've still all got whiplash, and we don't really know what it's done to us as a species.
So Father Ted, The IT Crowd, and?
I'd say the one that might be well known is called Black Books. The other is a show called Motherland that was quite successful recently.
That's quite a string of hits.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what exactly did you do that was so unforgivable, and when?
I think it was about 2016 or 17.
Yeah, well, that's when things really went insane.
Yeah, well, also I had a bit of, Trump derangement syndrome. I don't know how you were when he won the first time, but I thought the world was going to end. I was fully taken in by the, the way he was being portrayed. In fact, what was being done to him was about to be done to me.
Well, he said, "They're after you. I'm just in the way."
Yeah,
right. There's some real truth in that.
that.
Absolutely, 100%. It became quite a famous statement during this election cycle.
Right.
Yeah. It appealed to a lot of MAGA types and a lot of people who had been canceled unexpectedly by their friends and compatriots.
Well, I always think of that Muhammad Ali line where he said, the Vietnamese never called me no N-word. And I feel the same way about the left. The right never called me a bigot.
Right.
And they called me a bigot for basic things like saying, hey, you shouldn't be cutting the breasts off little girls. You shouldn't be.
Yep, there's one non-hate crime incident.
Yep.
We can keep piling them up.
There shouldn't be men in women's prisons. It's actually against the Geneva Convention to put men in women's prisons.
Yeah, but what is a man, sir?
All over, yeah. There's a terrible story in Ireland. This bloke who was, he had an awful childhood. He was forced by his father to rape his mother, and he was severely disturbed. His name was Barbie Kardashian, and because Ireland sneaked in self-ID without allowing the people of Ireland to really discuss it, Barbie Kardashian, who hates women with a completely complete tunnel vision,
in a manner you would not want to imagine ever, even in your darkest nightmares.
Exactly. He's now sharing living space with female prisoners.
Well, no psychopaths would pretend to be women just to get access to women. They're not that sort of people,
I used to say about the Catholic Church, at least priests had to learn Latin. You know, these guys, all they have to do is put on some eyeshadow,
Mm-hmm.
and every door is open to them.
Or complain about the fact that the bigots are using eyeshadow as a marker of gender, and that's not fair. Right.
Yeah, well, the rules change all the
Yeah.
time. And that's something I didn't realize as well, is that the rules were very fluid. And there were
Just like identity.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But it's like they try and pretend that identity is fluid by making the conversation fluid and hard to understand. I mean, part of me is very angry for the fact that no one stood in my career stood up for me, you know. But another part kind of understands, because the language around this issue is so deliberately confusing. They did
And the cost of standing up is high. Of course, the cost of not standing up is higher, but
Yes.
but it is understandable why you can understand why people choose to remain silent. That doesn't excuse it, but you can understand it.
Well, there's an interesting, I can't remember who did the, people are wondering, who the hell is this guy on Graham's left?
Hello. No, it's
I know, I
it's
feel
fine.
terrible that I'm talking so much. But this guy, I can't remember who said it, but he said that during the Nazi years, there's a kind of widespread assumption that everyone was afraid of being terrified, of being tortured by a guy with a dueling scar on his face. And he says, no, the reason that ordinary Germans went along with it for the most part was because of career advancement. They did not want their careers to be
You can
stalled.
understand, ever since COVID, ever since all this cancellation, you can understand exactly what happened in Germany. And I think they actually had far more excuse, because it was a lot easier to make sure people didn't know what the hell was going on when everyone wasn't connected to everything all the time. Plus, I would also say that the crimes that the Nazis were undertaking were of sufficient magnitude so that it's not surprising that people didn't believe they were happening. I mean, you know, what's his name? Michael Schellenberger, when he wrote the WPATH files, he told me that he had listened to the conversation I had with Abigail Schreier, which was a very early conversation on the child mutilation and sterilization front. And he said that his response, you know, and he's liberal in his orientation fundamentally, was that there was no way that that could be happening. And then, you know, 2 years later, he investigated it in great detail and came to the conclusion that, in fact, it was happening. It was led by a pack of the most reprehensible people you could possibly imagine. But
insane.
It's not worse than insane, truly malevolent and fetishistic and demented in the way that we've been describing WPATH people, and unforgivable. So you were standing up for like normal reality, and that was that, and it happened very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn to Andrew for a moment.
Right.
We'll get back to you right away. So Andrew, I think people probably on this podcast are a little bit more familiar with you in all likelihood than they are with Graham, not least because of your famous character. Now, of course, your name is going to escape me.
It's Titania McGrath.
Titania, yes, of course. And you wrote a book as her, which was very comical, and you had and still have. How active is Titania on X now?
Less active than she used to be, but I was very active as her for a long time. I wrote 2 books as her. We did a live show where I had an actress play her. We got to do a West End show in London. We only got to do one because we were booked for a week, but the person who runs the theatre found out and scotched that. So we ended up with a deal. So we only did one.
That's funny. It's very funny that Titania McGrath got cancelled.
There's that exactly. Yes, she probably wanted to cancel herself.
Yes.
But I'm in a different position from Graham because I was never feted or successful in the way that he was. So I wasn't cancelled in a sense. All it means is that I was satirising this movement, and that kind of meant that I was put in the bad pen.
Right. So you were an early part of the movement to monetize the social justice warriors.
Exactly. It was as cynical as that.
Absolutely to do that. So explain. Let's go back to the time of Titania McGrath. Explain what you were doing, and then also tell everybody all the other things that you've been involved in. I
suppose, like a lot of people within the comedy industry, because my background is stand-up comedy and playwriting and writing musicals and that kind of thing. A lot of people in the creative arts got dragged into this culture war because by virtue of what we do, we're on the front line of it, insofar as creative people are often either teasing the boundaries of tolerance or addressing issues, certainly with satire, when you're holding up to ridicule and scrutiny the most powerful elements of society. But all of a sudden, this movement came along, which we might call wokeness or critical social justice or whatever you want to call it, which was effectively a new powerful force in society, which no one was ridiculing. It was as though for all of us, this one closed system of thought had somehow successfully portrayed itself as the underdog and therefore became ring-fenced from satirical attention, which is an interesting, unprecedented thing. You know, normally we know the church, the state, the government, whatever, we know who the powerful people are and we know where the satirist's target will be. But this was a group that said, if you mock us, you're actually punching down.
You're a bully. Yeah.
You're a bully. Even though, of course, their whole movement was legitimizing bullying. And because of the whole thing was played.
Well, it's also a movement that was based on the belief that virtually every form of interaction can be construed as a kind of bullying, given that there's no human motivation fundamentally other than that of power.
Yes, exactly. So it's this power-obsessed, identity-obsessed movement that plays with language, plays elaborate word games so that they can...
Very effectively, too.
Hugely effectively, so they can be the bullies and say that any criticism is bullying. They can be regressive and call themselves progressive. They can be illiberal and call themselves liberal. They can twist everything linguistically around.
They can be men, call themselves
men and women. Everything is up for grabs in that.
Yeah, but that I think is the real danger, especially if you're a writer, that if you can change the meaning of fundamental word combination like men and women, then everything falls apart.
That's exactly right. I think, like, I've looked into this quite deeply at a psychological level, and I think you can make a strong biological case at the level of perception that there is no distinction more fundamental than the distinction between male and female. It's more fundamental than up and down. It's more fundamental than black and white or night and day. And if you can get people to swallow the equivalence of that fundamental pair of opposites, there is absolutely no lie whatsoever that they'll resist.
And in a sense, that would be fine if it was confined to the sort of the flesh pots of academia. If it were just the old postmodern theorists
or a gay club.
Oh, well, fine, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Or
there's certain things that have been weaponized, and one of them is the empathy that gay people feel for outsiders. You know, they've always been very protective of them, and they've
well, that's not quite my point. My point is that if it was just at the level of theorizing, which it was at some point until the late 80s, and then all of a sudden it became applied into society.
But that's
what I mean
what
is
I'm saying.
The government now pursues policies based on this inversion of what man and woman means, what truth and fiction is. It wouldn't matter if it was just theorists and activists.
Yeah,
that's my point.
Yeah.
But no, but
it's
what
the
I'm
compulsion
saying,
too that's the problem, right? The
Yeah.
fact that this is why I objected to Bill C-16 back in about 2016.
Yes,
it's
right.
like
your original sin.
you know, I can say whatever I want fundamentally, but the government doesn't get to compel it, and I don't care if the reason is hypothetically empathy and compassion. It's like, first of all, I doubt that, and second, it doesn't matter.
Well, actually, to Graham's point, there was a couple of weeks ago, the government spokesperson for equalities in the House of Lords, who's Baroness Jackie Smith, was asked explicitly, what is gender identity? What is the government's working definition of gender identity? Given that so many public health policies are being implemented on the basis of this concept, what is your definition? And she's turned it around and said, that's a gotcha. She said, you know, you should take this seriously. You know, in other words, not answering the question, fudging the answer, and turning it around and blaming the person for asking in the first place.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have this similarly just today in the House of Commons. We have a member of the House standing up, calling for blasphemy law, calling for the desecration of the Quran to be illegal. We've had cross-party discussions in the UK on the definition of Islamophobia, and it was agreed by both parties that Islamophobia is a type of racism based on Muslimness or perceived Muslimness, whatever that means. But it's not racism because Islam is not a race. It is a very ethnically diverse belief system. So when you have governments, and I know it's very bad in Canada, but when you have governments actually proceeding on this slippery linguistic terrain where even they don't understand the terms that they are deploying, then that means that those activists that I'm talking about have won. They've won out. And they are the most powerful, which is why, you know, we've been satirizing them. That's why we've been mocking them, because they're in charge.
We have a YouTube channel where we talk about, you know, the gender issue. And one of the important things we felt was you got to show people it's safe to laugh at this stuff, you know, because because it is ridiculous. One of the things I got into trouble for was Eddie Izzard said that he would have been a victim of the Holocaust. And I said, yes, the Nazis famously bigoted against straight white men with blonde hair. You know, that got me called a Holocaust denier by trans rights activists.
And didn't J.K. Rowling sort of, or other people supported that point of view, and they got called Holocaust deniers
Yeah.
as well.
Oh, yeah. Rowling is now a Holocaust denier because you know.
Well, what can you expect from a turf?
Yeah.